All right, welcome back to the George Poulos podcast. I'm going to go ahead and, in my meditation posture, take a few deep breaths and just get present because I've been in my head a lot lately. Lots of racing thoughts, lots of thinking about the future. So I just want to take this moment to get here. And I encourage you to do the same. Whatever it is you're doing, just be there. Just take a moment and just make sure you are actually there doing whatever it is you're doing. And remember, it's okay. It's okay to slip up. It's okay to have racing thoughts. Whenever you do have that spark of remembrance, then just take a moment to pull yourself back. Be aware of the thoughts instead of being all wrapped up in them. I think I want to get into this episode by talking about me and just what's been going on. So first of all, I lowered the price of my one-on-ones to $25. So $25, 40-minute conversation, and I'm kind of rebranding it from one-on-one coaching session to more of just a casual spiritual chat. I'm definitely open to giving advice, but I'm also just as open to mutually exploring the truth together. And I just kind of am craving more practice in the one-on-one connections. So I decided to lower the price. So that link is in the description if you want to talk to me on Zoom. The ones I've done so far have been a great time. I've done 3 of them. It's awesome. I love it. I love forming these actual connections because everyone listening to this, you and I, we do have a connection through this podcast, but it's interesting, right? Because I sit here and as I'm recording this, I am in the present moment. But by the time you listen to it, the moment has passed. And I had this thought earlier that when you're absolutely present with people, that's how you have the most impact on them, right? When you're absolutely present with people. So while I think this podcast absolutely can transmit the truth, right? Like the vocal vibrations and the energetic vibrations are being captured into the microphone and on the video, and they are absolutely being transmitted, right, across the internet. So I think the truth can be transmitted this way, but I think it is, in a sense, limited. The channel is slightly limited by the fact that by the time you're listening to this, it is in the past, if that makes sense. But of course, like when we read books, those were written in the past, and obviously books have a tremendous capacity to transmit the truth as well. So I'm by no means knocking the podcast, but I have been feeling this calling to get into more actual present connections. And of course, how do you really transmit truth between 2 individuals? You show up in the same room together and you put the egos aside. Of course, that's like the closest you can get, right, to an open channel between 2 human hearts is physical presence. But I think the Zoom video calls do it pretty well as well. It's interesting thinking about this podcast, and I always get a little self-conscious about how much I talk about this podcast itself. It's kind of very meta, but this is part of my journey unfolding, right? It's like there was a part of my spiritual journey where it was all internal. I wasn't even really talking about it to anyone. In fact, I was afraid to talk about it because I thought it was a little weird, a little corny. I was worried about people judging me. And then, of course, I hit a point where I was so solidly on the spiritual path that it just like had to start coming out. And it started to come out in conversations with friends and people around me. And then it hit a point where it started coming out onto my like public creativity, right? In the form of this podcast. This is a form of spiritual expression It literally represents my confidence, my dedication to the spiritual path increasing, right? Because it's coming out. Now I'm trying to teach it. I'm trying to share it. I'm trying to actually articulate, kind of put into form what I'm learning, these intangible lessons that I'm learning, right? So this podcast is a step on the spiritual path. I've started to feel like there's a way in which this podcast is fairly isolated, right? Like I'm sitting here alone. I'm not really talking to people. And a couple experiences recently that really brought my awareness to this was I got invited on to do a podcast called Life Unpotted. Sophie and Daisy, if you're listening to this, as you know, as I shared, I was gushing over the experience. I had such a great time. And it really made me realize how much of a hermit mode I've been in, right? I think hermit modes are part of the spiritual path because you start to discover all these things. You start to learn all these new ways of looking at life. And as you look at the people around you, not all of them are thinking that way at all. A lot of them are stuck in past ways that you've been thinking of life in the past, right? And so I think there's this thing starts to naturally happen as you begin to awaken, and especially if you're not surrounded by like-minded people, if you're not surrounded by people who are interested in awakening, there's a tendency just to kind of clam up. I know I've experienced various cycles of this, and I'm currently, I think, obviously on this podcast, I'm indulging in my spiritual expression, but much of the times in my real physical life, I'm really not sharing. I'm really, my throat chakra is closed. I'm sitting there in silence. I have this preconceived idea that what I have to say is not really welcome. It's not really aligned with how most of the people around me are thinking. So I've noticed myself slipping into a bit of a hermit space. And obviously there's, on the one hand, you could say that's a bad thing because I'm not getting as much socialization. But on the other hand, it's a good thing because I'm able to dive deeper into my spiritual learnings, into my spiritual path. I'm not getting weighed down by well-meaning doubters, right? And people who are concerned about me and the path that I'm taking, right? So I can really just dive into my books, my study, my expression on this podcast. What I've found as I've expressed more and more of this side of myself on social media, on the podcast, etc., is that I've started to feel like, okay, actually, my people may not be physically in front of me right now, but they are out there. They are out there in the world. I feel their presence, right? In an episode a while back, I spoke about how I unfollowed everyone on Instagram, something I had wanted to do for a long time. Finally did it, unfollowed everybody. I've been slowly following more people again, and I'm really nitpicking who I follow, and I'm kind of only following people who are, honestly, a lot of people who are doing the exact same thing as me, doing a podcast online about spirituality or in other ways sharing about the truth, sharing about spirituality, sharing about awakening online, right? So I've kind of been, right, instead of feeling all of this past energy of people that I knew in my past, which really, it's not about them. It's about who I was when I knew them, right? So by seeing all these people I followed back in high school, I would constantly be reminded of that past version of myself that I'm like actively trying to break free and expand past. So unfollowing all those people really helped me take a step into who I was becoming, and then actively choosing only to follow people who embodied who I wanted to become helped me take that even further, right? Just like really surrounding myself by this energy of this higher self that I wanted to become. So that's been a really beautiful process of expansion and of accepting who I am. And right, this manifested for me on the internet realm, on the virtual realm, before it manifested in the physical realm. I feel like I'm just very, very slowly inching my way towards more aligned connections in my real life. And there's a caveat here because like I know that, right, like a big lesson in the Course in Miracles is to like see everyone as God. Ram Dass talks about this a lot too. This is something that Maharaji taught him. See everyone as God. Everyone is God. We're all cut from the same fabric of the universe, right? We are all a piece of God, whether everybody knows it or not, whether people are stuck in ego games, capitalist mindsets or not, everybody is God, right? So even when I'm sitting in silence in these social interactions because I don't quite feel able to participate, I feel kind of misaligned, I'm still like sitting there kind of in awe of all these people and just like watching what's happening. But there is sometimes a sense where I feel a little bit separate. That's something I've been thinking about and working through. And then I really love and am obsessed with going for walks and just like making brief eye contact with people, just feeling the energy of the city. I love walking to the park. I feel like I have the most euphoric and connected experiences because there's nothing that needs to be done. I'm like by myself. I'm in my element. I'm experiencing silence, and I just get to watch this beautiful phenomenon of life unfolding. And just like going with the God analogy, which I actually believe in, I actually believe everyone is God. It's interesting to see all these different iterations of God doing all their little things as they're walking down the sidewalk and sitting on their stoops and doing all their various sports in the park. I just love these experiences. I feel like my solo walks are really special and interconnected and make me feel really connected, right? Despite this phenomenon I'm talking about of not feeling so connected in my interpersonal circles, I still do have this like greater connection that I'm getting with very simple things like brief moments of eye contact, just being around people, whether or not I'm talking to them. So I am feeling that connectedness, but there is right, like this sense of alignment, this sense of like finding my tribe that I am really beginning to feel like is being embodied and manifested on social media, on the internet. It's lagging a little bit in my physical realm, right? But as I was saying, it's slowly, I'm watching it start to manifest, and I'm in awe of this process. And recording that podcast with Life Unpotted was one of these experiences where I felt like, holy shit, like, okay, this internet connection just manifested in real life, and having that sort of alignment with people who are thinking about the same things in real life, it's very special. It's very validating. It felt very like I felt like I opened. I felt like I could take a breath of fresh air. I felt like, oh, my people are out there, and they're not just on the internet. Like they are in physical form as well. And it's only a matter of time before I am around more and more of these people. Right. So this has, I guess you could call it one of my predicaments, right? And it's a predicament that I try not to be so wrapped up into. Like, I remember I used to really tell myself this story that I was attached to, that I didn't have enough friends. So I try not to attach to narratives anymore, but I have been aware of this sort of predicament, or I don't even want to call it a predicament, just a phenomenon where I've been in a bit of a hermit mode. I don't feel like speaking around people really because I feel like there's a misalignment. But to feel that connection in real life of like-minded spiritual beings who are interested in putting the ego aside, interested in awakening, interested in exploring the truth, it made me feel really good. I remember not even recording the podcast itself, but just like hanging out with them in general almost made me feel like I felt like we were entering like a psychedelic space together. And it really left me with a lot of revelations. Like every time I do a psychedelic, for pretty much like the next few days, I'll just be scribbling in my journal and my notes app with all these realizations about life and about the truth. And just having that in-person interaction with like-minded people almost gave me the same amount of profound realizations. I mean, that's what made me realize I am in a little bit of a hermit mode. I am doing this solitary podcast, right? And this actually came up in the last one-on-one I did, how it's like, if you're having a spiritual awakening and you're around people who just aren't thinking that way, it can be very, very easy to slip into a feeling of isolation, a feeling of being misunderstood, a feeling of self-doubt, a feeling of wondering if you should reconform to the ways of life of the people around you. But what I want to say, if anyone is experiencing this sort of feeling of isolation, is that we are out there, right? It's evidence. Me speaking to you through the internet is evidence of this in itself. We are out there and we have physical bodies too. Like, we are literally here in the world together. And I have this feeling, this sensation that like we're all gravitating towards each other. And as we find each other, our love is just going to expand and awaken more and more people. And I kind of think about my partner in this way. We are really aligned on how we see the world, aligned on things like the universality of love, and that love is the way of life and all of these things. And that, in a sense, me finding my partner, Julia, in a sense, feels like, because I had an awakening and because I took the path seriously and because I took the path deeper and deeper and deeper, and I started to actually change, my being started to change. I stopped being willing to accept the traditional, the normal, the standard, the rigid relationship. That's how I gravitated towards her, right? And so it's like, as we go on this path, even if there are periods of being a hermit, of periods of isolation, I see that as the process of gravitating towards the truth, towards our tribe. I think it's inevitable, right? It's inevitable. There's this idea that I toss around a lot, that a lot of spiritual thinkers toss around a lot, and it's that everyone outside us is just a mirror, right? So if, say, in high school and college, you were a certain way, you were very deep in your ego, you were very stressed and anxious and constantly worrying about the future, it makes sense that you would attract people who show you yourself, right? People who are similar to you in that way. And it makes sense that as you start to have a spiritual awakening, then in those other people, right, if they're just mirrors of you, you're starting to see parts of yourself that you're growing past. So it's only natural to have these growing pains and to drift from certain people. I think it's just the process of living and growing and changing. And I've reflected this before. This has been like a cycle in my life where I feel like I grow very, very quickly and I move on very quickly, and I'm just watching this continue to happen the more that my mind and way of life changes. It's like I'm always in this process of attracting the people who are aligned with who I am now, as opposed to who I am in the past. I think it's common, and no right or wrong, right? But just sharing. I think it's common to gravitate to, or it's common to feel like you need to stick with people who you've connected with in the past. And that becomes, if you're dedicated to a spiritual journey, that becomes tricky because not everyone is going to grow at the same pace, right? It's like the Ram Dass quote, "We're all walking each other home." You might be walking home much faster than your friends from high school, for example. And it's no shade on everybody, right? We're all on a highly, highly unique journey. And if you really want to take strides towards home, it's like, it's okay to drift from people and have periods of isolation. And then it's okay to flow with your nature, and it's okay to meet new people, and it's okay to go through this whole process of social life and the development and just going with how it unfolds naturally. It's okay, right? Generally, I'm all about letting go of the ego. I think the ego is what could convince you must remain friends with people from your past, right? But I think that is a potential block that would hold you back from digging deeper into your truth, right? And on the note of having recorded that episode with Life Unpotted, I also, a while back, recorded an episode with Nathaniel Drew. He came to visit New York. We actually recorded the episode right here, and I just heard that episode is going up on his podcast tomorrow, Friday. So check that one out as well. I thought that was a funny synchronicity that both podcasts ended up going live the same week, although they were recorded at very different points. I almost feel, right, you know me, I'm always looking for and open to signs from the universe. I almost feel like the universe is trying to give me a little nudge back into the world, back into interaction with people, right? A little step out of my hermit mode. So that's what kind of inspired the plug at the beginning about wanting to do more of the one-on-ones and things like that. And I'm also tossing around ideas of doing maybe community Zoom calls, either with patrons or with the entire community. So we will see how this all continues to unfold. And another thing, I may have mentioned this on a podcast episode in the past, but there is a meditation teacher training program going down in New York City in the fall winter, and I had been seriously considering it. Then I kind of stopped thinking about it, and now I'm seriously considering it again. Obviously, be here now. I don't really need to make a decision until it's in my face, but that feels like a way that I could actually, right? It's like, what am I doing kind of wallowing in this feeling that nobody gets me, right? Like, what's the point of that? I feel like I've been doing that long enough, and I feel like taking this meditation teacher training program, obviously, if anyone else is going to be taking the same class, there must be some sort of alignment, right? We're interested in meditation. We're interested in enlightenment. So I'm starting to feel like I should get involved with more people who are thinking about the same things. I think it may really help decrease my self-doubt on the spiritual path, and I think it may really help increase the magnitude of the vibrations of love and truth that I'm able to transmit into the world, right? And that's going to feel good, tremendously good for my own heart. Another thing I realized is, like, I feel like I'm only like 5% open on this podcast, which is a tremendous improvement, because I think when I used to be making YouTube videos on my skate channel, for example, I was probably like 0.05% open and honest with my creativity. I've realized I've just become conscious of the fact that, like, I have a long way to go to open up. Like, there are things I want to say that I'm still scared to say. So just bear with me, because every episode I'm trying to just open the flow. And sometimes in some moments I really do open it. But then sometimes what wants to come through the channel is too threatening to my ego, right? I particularly think of topics like love, sexuality. That's kind of it, maybe. Maybe psychedelics. Maybe I've held back a little bit on like drugs and psychedelics. I do think in time, like, I'm going to try to open it more and more and more. And you are all actually helping me. I encourage you to keep coming at me with these hard-hitting questions. I'm loving your questions. And speaking of questions, I think let's get into it. Oh, you know what I want to say before the questions actually is I started praying. Haha. I started praying. This is inspired by the Course in Miracles and Marianne Williamson. Right, let me read you, because I've pulled this out for myself multiple times now. And I actually forgot. I wanted to do a similar prayer before I recorded the podcast, but I kind of forgot. This is A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson, which is essentially a synthesis of A Course in Miracles. And something stuck out to me. She was talking about how she became a great public speaker, and she became a great public speaker by surrendering the outcome, right? Trusting the universe, just showing up and being present, and essentially allowing God to channel through her, to just say whatever her intuition told her to say, right? As opposed to allowing her ego to control and manipulate the words that would come out. She just opened the freaking channel, right? And that's like exactly what I'm trying to do on this podcast. So here's a prayer that Marianne suggests. Dear God, I surrender this situation to you. May it be used for your purposes. I ask only that my heart be open to give love and to receive love. May all the results unfold according to your will. Right? And I've spoken about this before, the aversion I used to have to religious language. Like, I used to be really turned off by anything that referred to God. I have gotten over this barrier because now I see God and the universe as synonymous. Right? So I used to also be turned off and closed off to the idea of trusting the universe, but now I'm just deep enough on my spiritual journey where I understand that everything is God, right? I'm God, you're God. It's one fabric, right? There's no separation. We are not human beings that were placed into the earth. We are of the earth. Literally inextricable from the earth. The earth was not placed into the solar system. The earth is of the solar system. It's a piece of the fabric of the solar system, right? Our solar system is of the fabric of the galaxy, of the universe. There's no separation here. The idea of separation only comes from our ego. Anyways, that's a little bit about how I got over my fear of the word God. And I use this prayer. Actually, I think I used it I've used it twice recently. One was showing up to the Life Unpotted podcast, because I can get very nervous about, I need to make sure I sound intelligent. I need to make sure I say the right things. Making a prayer like that, it's like, actually, okay, if the podcast goes horribly wrong, if I say all the wrong things, maybe that was meant to be. Maybe that's part of the plan that the universe has for me. And that helps you get the ego out of the way. And the ego is what's going to make you perform badly. That's what's funny about it, is if you're calculating what you should say and making sure you say the right things, you're going to choke up. You're going to get nervous. You're going to be anxious about controlling the outcome, making sure it goes well. So you're actually going to trip up, say some weird shit, embarrass yourself, etc. Right? But when you trust the universe, when you make a prayer like that, when you surrender the outcome to the universe and you just show up, and when your goal is to be a loving presence, just spread love and be present, what can go wrong, right? What can go wrong? So I used a prayer like that, and what I mean by that is I just said it to myself. I just set the intention within my heart before the podcast recording. I also said it just before hanging out with a friend, because, I've realized, like, I actually have social anxiety. Like, as much as I feel like I'm getting enlightened and progressing and overcoming my triggers, I still have social anxiety. So stating that prayer to myself helped me significantly. It helped me just show up, trust that social interaction was going to go exactly how it was supposed to go. And that really, it's the same. It's like, it feels like the realizations I had when I first read The Universe Has Your Back by Gabby Bernstein. It's just this feeling of peace. It's like, all I need to do is be present, right? It really takes the pressure off. There's the feeling that you need to make sure everything goes well kind of falls away. And I really need to remember to, like, set this kind of intention to record on the podcast, because that peace that I just described, that like ease that washes over my body when I remember this wisdom, it feels so good. And then it's like a lot of the times when I'm sitting here, I'm like trying to make sure I'm saying the right things. Like, right, I still get caught up in that. And I just forgot to set that intention. And, I could feel now I feel the self-conscious dropping away a little bit since I just read that to myself. But at the beginning of this episode, there was a little bit of this like, oh, like, is this the right time? What should I say? What should I talk about? So that was the update. I've been trying to intentionally pray and surrender the outcomes of various situations to God or to the universe, which significantly helps me. It significantly reduces my anxiety when I do that, because I feel like it's okay and it's safe to put the ego aside, and I can just show up and be present and watch it unfold instead of trying to anxiously control how it unfolds. So much more peaceful, so much more joyous. And right, both of those scenarios, the podcast and hanging out with that friend, turned out just wonderfully. Things tend to turn out just wonderfully when you surrender the outcomes to the universe. And even if they don't turn out wonderfully, it's only your ego deciding that they weren't wonderful, right? Because our ego has a very limited scope. Our ego can't see the greater plan that the universe has. I often bring up the example of my broken foot, right? When I broke my foot skateboarding a few years ago, obviously my ego thought it was terrible. I wasn't going to be able to skate for the next 8 weeks. I was freaking out. I was starting to get depressed. But now that I have more of a perspective on what happened, looking back on it, I used those 8 weeks to explore myself outside of skateboarding. It really accelerated my spiritual journey to have that alone time. That was a time where I started experimenting with new forms of creative expression that felt really good in my heart. That's kind of the time period where this podcast was born. I had the time and the space to dabble and to have fun and to create new things and to drop my attachments to the skateboarding stuff that I had been attached to in the past. Right, so my ego thought the broken foot was terrible. Obviously, that's the natural reaction to a misfortune like that. But now that I see how the universe's plan has unfolded, I see, oh, actually, it wasn't such a bad thing. That momentary pain, that momentary depression was nothing compared to the expansion that misfortune allowed me to experience, right? So now I'm grateful I broke my foot, right? And it's like, yeah, generally it makes you feel better if you surrender how your ego is judging a situation and how your ego thinks a situation needs to go. If you just surrender that outcome to the universe, you can enter that situation from a state of peace and presence and accepting. And when you do that, when you're present, you step into your true power. So you're likely to be more quote unquote effective in that situation, right? You're going to be more of an effective agent. You're going to be more of an effective agent for the universe's plan. Instead of trying to assert your ego plan, you're going to be a more effective agent for carrying out the universe's plan, which is the better plan. The universe is guiding us towards peace. The universe is guiding us towards love. Whereas on the other hand, the ego pretty much only guides us towards suffering. I mean, the ego can definitely guide us towards like money and success and accomplishment, but that stuff never feels as good as we think it's going to, right? The universe's plan is the plan that actually feels good in our hearts. Right, so I spoke about how I feel like I'm only 5% open, right? This all happened after I recorded that Life Unpotted episode. Maybe you should all listen to that. Maybe something significant happened there. I came out with all these realizations. Anyway, so like that helped me realize that I had been in a hermit mode because I experienced, right, how good it felt to connect with like-minded individuals on the physical plane. It felt incredible, euphoric. then I realized, holy shit, like I've been in a hermit mode. I'm walking around with walls up. I'm closed. I'm not open. I'm not allowing my love to flow outwards. I'm like keeping it in for some reason. And it never feels good to keep your love contained within you, right? It's natural. The love wants to go out. The love wants to flow outwards into the world, into the trees, into the sky, into the stars, into the moon, into all the strangers on the sidewalk, love wants to reverberate outwards endlessly, right? So having walls up can be painful. You can have too much love building within you, and if you're not letting it go out, the system gets thrown out of whack a little bit. So that was a realization I had. And then I saw this TikTok creator. Let me see if I could find their username. Okay, their username is Hopey Dopey 2.0. Anyways, I came across a TikTok of them describing a story where it was like an interaction with a stranger, and they ended up saying something super silly, and their temptation was to second guess it, to be self-conscious about that silly thing they said. And they describe that as this thing that they do, this tendency to want to limit oneself, right? To like, it's like as we walk around in public, especially, or if you're in a home environment where like you're not vibrating freely, it's like there's this temptation as we go about our day to remain very small, right? If we have the urge to say something, there's this temptation to be like, oh, what will they think of that? Is that weird? There's temptation to hold our energy inside. It's kind of exactly what I'm describing with my hermit mode. It's like this temptation to walk around with walls. It's like I feel like I have something to say, some expression, some form of love or creativity wants to come out, but I have these walls, so it's like it doesn't get to come out. And that's in effect imposing a limitation on oneself. It's like the love wants to go outwards, and we should not feel like we have to limit ourselves, right? This is something I want to work on with myself. I want to be less self-conscious as I go around, and I've improved tremendously throughout my life. But I still have work to do. But then it's interesting because sometimes I think in certain situations, silence is the best. And limiting myself can be the best thing to do in certain situations, because like I don't always want to have to assert who I am. Like if I'm around people where I feel like I need to assert who I am in order to get that love out, maybe it's just not the right people. But I think we should be giving people the benefit of the doubt. And I think especially when we're out in public and we're walking around strangers, I think our assumption about everyone we meet for the first time out in public is that they are beings of infinite love, which is their truth, whether they know it or not, right? So we should assume the best of people, and we should assume like our loving vibrations will be received welcomely, if not returned with just as much love. So that creator, shout out to that creator. That was after I watched that particular TikTok, and maybe I'll remember to just include a link to it. I remember feeling like, like why do I get so anxious when I like want to walk into a new cafe and I don't know how the ordering system works? Like why? Do you know what I mean? So I felt a little bit more courage to just expand, right? Generally, it feels good to expand, right? If I think about this podcast, it's like, since I'm not really around a like-minded community so much, it's almost like my creative expression like is exploding out of like a shaken bottle. It's exploding and it's just being funneled into this form, right? But I think it wants to spread out more evenly across people, places, things, as well as the internet. Just rambling here. I think I'm going to get into the questions now. All right, all of the questions are coming from Patreon today, patreon.com/George Poulos. I give priority to answering questions on the podcast to patrons. So $3 a month if you want to join and ask a question. First question. 2 recent podcasts you did talked about different topics and approaches. In my mind, they seem to conflict, and I'm wondering how you balance them. 1, being triggered by something. The suggestion is to meditate on the trigger and not listen to the innate response to be anxious or hide from the trigger. 2, you suggest trusting your instincts, that when your mind and body are telling you to do something, to do it. I feel like my body inherently tells me at times to react harshly, maybe with anger or anxiety, etc. How do we differentiate these responses and know when our body is telling us to do something we need versus when we have a fight or flight response that should be meditated on? Okay, here's the thing, and apologies for switching the camera, but the answer just came through much more clearly. There comes a time on your journey of developing awareness where your mind and body are telling you to meditate on the trigger, right? You've reacted unconsciously to the trigger enough times. You're reaching a point of awareness. You're reaching a point of being aware that your unconscious reactions, that following the patterns from the past, that reacting to the same kind of situation in the same way over and over and over again, it hasn't worked however many times you've done it, 10 times, 20 times, 100 times, that you finally realize, maybe it's time to actually take a look at what's going on. So you come to a point on the journey where your mind and body are telling you, let's not take this unconscious ego reaction. Let's actually meditate on this trigger, or let's work through this trigger in some way. So, and here's an interesting perspective to keep in mind. Anytime you hear me saying something on the podcast, like suggesting that you meditate on your triggers rather than reacting to them unconsciously based on your ego, that's not me prescribing. That's not me telling you that this is the right way. I'm speaking from a very particular point of a journey that is highly unique and highly individual for each of us. Right? If you're hearing me make that suggestion and it's really resonating with you, that means that you're hitting that point of awareness where you're ready to start meditating on your triggers and working through the unconscious patterns, right? I'm just a mirror of you. So when I say something that resonates for you, this is not coming from my brain to your brain. The fact that you sought out this podcast, you're seeking out this advice, it's resonating with you, means that you're traversing your journey of awareness and you've found a mirror in me to reflect to you where you're at and where you want to go, right? So it's less of this, oh, you have to meditate on your triggers in order to work through them. It's more of like, where are you at and are you ready? Are your mind and body telling you to take this step? I'm merely a mirror of the awareness that you're developing. Ultimately, with anything I say, with anything I suggest, it's really up to you. Now, speaking from my own experience, I'm at a place in my journey where pretty much every time when I get triggered by something, my response, my mind and body tell me to meditate on it, to be curious about it. That doesn't mean there aren't intense feelings sometimes, and I accept and embrace those feelings, and I allow them to pass through me completely. I try not to reject anything. I try to move directly through all of my emotional reactions. But I still try to take opportunities to meditate, to observe, to be in the seat of the observer, to cultivate my awareness about the total situation of what's going on, because I'm at a point in my journey where it's clear to me that that's the best way to go. It's clear to me because of my experience, because of my learnings, because of my current state of awareness, that generally reacting unconsciously in this way that is very painful to me, listening to the ego, going through this pattern again and again and again, I've come to the awareness that that's going to cause me more suffering in the long run. So I'm at the point where my intuition, it's not that I'm pushing away something that wants to come out. It's actually like I'm doing what is aligned for me. I think that's my answer. I had a few takes at this one. The answer kept clarifying more and more, so I'm going to leave it at that one. Okay, question number 2 for this episode from Patreon. I would love to hear your take on how to live a life as pain-free as possible, perhaps specifically related to the pain of breakups. And what should the approach be when establishing a new love connection if you don't want to attach but still feel a very deep connection? So this is definitely a 2-part question. First, what's your take on living a life as pain-free as possible, specifically related to the pain of breakups? So the effort on this journey is not to escape pain, but it's to embrace that pain as a part of life, right? So pain is inevitable in life, right? We're not going to get to a place where we never stub our toe. We're not going to get to a place where there are never any emotional bruises occurring, but we can get to a place where we accept the present moment so radically that even if the present moment is quote unquote painful, since we're there, since we're in the experience, since we're embracing the pain and not trying to push it away and pretend it's not there, the pain ceases to be painful, right? So the way that you live a pain-free life is to embrace the fact that life has up and downs, life has moments that are painful, but you come to this place where since you're embracing everything, since you're not, you see a lot of the times what we do is, and now I'll bring in the pain of a breakup. Let's say we've gone through a breakup and it's very emotionally painful. The temptation is to wish that we were not experiencing this emotional pain, right? When we do that, we create a split. We create this vision of how we think we should be. We think we should not be experiencing this emotional pain. But the reality is we are experiencing this emotional pain from the breakup. So that disconnect from how you think it should be to what the present moment actually is, that causes a suffering that we do have the power to eliminate. We can't eliminate the actual pain that is felt in the present moment. But if we just embrace the present moment, so when pain arises, we accept. When discomfort arises, we accept. And vice versa, when joy arises, we accept. When love arises, we accept. If we just accept everything that is, we don't create that dissociation. We don't create that separation. We drop the idea of how we think the moment should be, and we simply accept the moment that is in front of us. Pain starts to have this beautiful quality to it. You start to understand that it's part of the cycle of life, right? It's the resistance of pain that causes the true pain. Direct pain in itself is not actually that painful if you're not imposing this mental judgment upon the pain. There's a tendency, like I said, if you're in pain, to wish you were not in pain, which causes way more psychological torment than the actual pain that is arising in the present moment. If pain arises in the present moment, simply be with it. Don't reject it. Don't create a dissociation where you wish that you weren't experiencing this pain. Go right into it. Go fully into it. I've thought about this with grief recently because our cat Pocket passed away. Rest in peace, sweet angel Pocket. But right, so a cat dying, a beloved cat dying, is very sad, right? There's this grief reaction that comes out. But there's a big difference between allowing yourself to go through that natural process of grief. There's a big difference between accepting that grief and wishing that the grief wasn't happening. If I was there wishing that the grief wasn't happening, now there's two layers of suffering. Really, I want to say there's only one layer of suffering, because if you accept grief head on and allow your body to move through it, it's actually not a bad thing. Only our ego mind can judge that grief is a bad thing. But if you just live through it, there's no room for mind judgments to come in. Nothing is bad. Nothing is painful. It all just is. Every experience, good or bad, however your ego wants to label it, is a very beautiful and significant part of the human experience, right? it's that layer. Oh, I wish I wasn't feeling so sad right now. Oh, I want to get over it faster. That's that mental layer of suffering that is unnecessary and we can get rid of by embracing the present moment no matter what is going on. So this is very important. If you're experiencing pain from a breakup, the way is not to feel guilty that you're experiencing pain. The way is not to try to meditate on it so that you can get over the pain faster. No, the way is to totally accept the present moment as it is. Then you're gonna, it's good, it's beautiful to fully embrace that pain, fully move through it, because then it's really gonna teach you what it needs to teach you. And I promise you, there's this place that you can reach if you truly accept whatever present moment is in front of you, where nothing is bad. Even if you scrape your elbow on the sidewalk, it's not bad. It's not bad. If you're there, if you're right there, yes, there's pain, but the mental anguish, the mental torment, the psychological dissociation of wishing that you weren't in pain goes away. If that's not there, there's really paradoxically nothing wrong with pain. So that's how to live a pain-free life. It's to embrace that pain as a part of life and stop trying to resist it. Okay, and I just thought of the perfect analogy to hit this one home, and I've shared this before. So I used to hate throwing up. Despised it, hate it. Throwing up made me so incredibly miserable. But as I started to learn the power of being present and the power of accepting what is, I noticed that when my cat threw up, she didn't seem to be suffering from this mental anguish about throwing up. The cat would simply just throw up. Obviously, the cat doesn't even have the mental capacity to be in mental anguish, to think about the fact that it is throwing up. But we can learn from the cat, right? So like, I hit this point where I was throwing up and I was like, you know what? I'm going to consciously try to throw up like a cat. In other words, I'm just going to throw up. I'm not going to think about how much it sucks that I'm throwing up. I'm not going to think about how much I hate throwing up. I'm simply just going to surrender to my body and throw up. That's it. Just be present while throwing up. And it was the best throw up experience I've ever had. It was the first time I've ever thrown up where it didn't make me miserable. I simply just threw up. My body did its thing. And that was it. Right, so this is an analogy that you can take with you for dealing with the pain of a breakup, for example. Don't add that layer of mental anguish by wishing that you weren't going through the pain of the breakup. Just allow your body, allow your being to go through the pain. That's going to eliminate so much of the suffering, if not all of the suffering. And you can reach this place where if a cat could go through a breakup, go through the breakup like a cat would go through it. If you can do that, it's very beautiful. Your body knows what to do. Your being knows what to do to get through that. Surrender to it. Be there. Show up for it. Don't be in your head wishing it wasn't happening, because that's how you add an unnecessary layer of mental anguish and psychological torment. We don't need that. Just go right into it. Now, part 2 to your question. Very different question. What should the approach be when establishing a new love connection if you don't want to attach but still feel a very deep connection? My suggestion would be to tell the truth 100%. Take your mask off, show yourself. In this case, whoever the budding connection is with, be very honest about where you're at, about who you are in this moment. If you're on a journey where you're exploring the idea of non-attachment in relationships, in love, then literally say that. Say that exactly. Speak about your uncertainties. Speak about how you're feeling about love and non-attachment. Be willing to put the truth right out there and to find out whether or not it's accepted, whether the relationship can tolerate the truth. Now, I promise you, from my own, or I don't want to make promises, from my own experience, practicing non-attachment in love is the way that you form deeper loving connections. Attached relationships that are very linked at the ego level, at the anxious attachment level, can only go so deep because they're defined by this need to control one another and attach to one another. It stays at the ego level. The ego level is not very deep. If you want to get deeper, move into a truth relationship, tell the truth no matter what. Try to drop the rules and the expectations of relationship. Try to accept yourself unconditionally, accept the other unconditionally. Don't attach to the feeling that the relationship has to work out. The goal should be find out if the relationship can sustain the truth. The goal should be, can I be 100% myself? Can the other be 100% themselves? If we're both fully maskless, fully spiritually naked, is the relationship going to continue? What happens when you do that is you're shifting the priority of the relationship away from the ego, and you're trying to actually find out if this is a universe-supported relationship. And you can only do that by dropping the calculations, dropping the efforts to control, dropping the efforts to attach. And if you can successfully drop all those attachments, that's how you move into the deepest space of love and intimacy that there is. Okay, here's a question on YouTube about love and monogamy and non-monogamy. As someone that just cut communication with someone who I was in a monogamous relationship with, it's difficult to see that I was stifling her love of flirting. We still love each other and are open to being together again when we both heal further, but I definitely feel like I was binding her with a contract of monogamy when she loved to love people freely. She once brought up flirting with others at parties and described it as showing how strong our love really is. That was hard to accept because my ego was telling me this man is going to think he's better than me and that my partner wants him over me. So I would have to trust that my partner would only take it so far. I loved how you expressed the idea of relationships being just a time where energies basically are choosing each other's company, but it's not either this or that, and that all boundaries are porous. I tie that to this, and I guess I just want to know, where do you draw the line if you still want to only be sexual with one person? Okay, so please take my response as an open exploration as opposed to a prescription, right? I'm figuring this one out myself actively. So where I come from is I've always been a person who loves to flirt with people. I love to be very open and loving with my energy. Now I've been in like over 4 long-term monogamous relationships. And in the past, because I just kind of unconsciously accepted the traditional standard for a monogamous relationship, I would automatically like limit the amount that I would be flirtatious with other people. My love was really channeling into that one person. And I would really limit my love from spreading out to other people. Now, I did this unconsciously because I thought that I was supposed to. But in all of these relationships, I found that this stifling of my energy that was really imposed upon myself. And I don't blame my partners for it at all. And really, I was choosing people, right? Like I was limiting myself by subscribing to this belief of how relationships had to be. So I was choosing people unconsciously who would also have me limit my energy in a similar way, right? But what I experienced over time in these relationships is that it did not feel good to keep my loving energy inside, right? Like this loving energy wants to pour outwards onto many people. Trying to stuff that within myself and limiting it to one person unconsciously didn't feel good. And I feel like this is the part of the reason that all of these relationships ended up in a breakup, because I was really shoving this energy aside. I thought this energy was unacceptable by the society, by my partner, right? This is like an embodiment of how I used to be a people pleaser. I was so afraid to accept who I was inherently, how I naturally wanted to use my energy, that I shoved it in. I didn't talk about it. I didn't speak about it. I tried to pretend it wasn't there. in big part because of how I was conditioned and because I thought that I had to do that in order to please people. I thought that was how I would get love from other people. As I've started to accept myself and accept that I can use my energies in any way that I want to, I have a more of a bird's eye perspective on this. And now it's like, okay, I'm starting to understand myself. I'm starting to understand I don't need to limit myself in order to be loved. I can be exactly who I am and I can still be loved. Because of where I'm at on the spiritual journey, it's really clarifying to me that how I love someone is to accept them unconditionally. So you ask, like, where do you draw the line if you only want to be sexual with one person? Where my perspective sits now is that if I want to be sexual with one person, like that's me. That's what I want. But that does not give me the right to assume or expect that someone else would want to only be sexual with me, right? Where I come from is that when I'm with someone, whoever's in front of me, I should accept them totally for who they are in this moment. And that doesn't mean that if their behavior triggers me that I need to suppress being triggered and like suppress my emotional response and pretend it's not there. No, in the right relationship, if someone else's behavior is triggering to me, if we're in a truth relationship together where we're aiming to grow, where we're aiming to heal ourselves together, if someone else's like preferences with love and monogamy and flirting with other people, if their behavior is triggering to me, we should feel free to bring that out into the open, to be like, hey, here's how my ego is responding to this. I'm having all these uncomfortable feelings, right? We bring this all out into the open, and something very beautiful happens when you can detach from your ego, because then it doesn't become an argument and it doesn't become a fight where it's like, you're flirting with other people at the party, you don't care about me. No, it's like we're aware of what's going on. Your behavior is causing this reaction in me. I want to acknowledge and talk about this reaction. Let's see if we can almost like meditate on what's going on together. And through that process, it's like that's how you can really come to a conscious understanding of whether the relationship is going to work. Because it's like in the right partnership, like I would assume you're curious about your partner. You want what's best for your partner as well, right? And if it's just not working, if you really love that person, but their behavior it's just not working for the relationship right now, unconditional love means that like you want them to live their best life. You want them. It doesn't resonate with me anymore to want to enforce a limitation on somebody to make sure that they keep me comfortable, to make sure that our relationship is sustained. What I want for someone I love is for them to live their best life, is for them to do everything that they want to do, need to do, to explore themselves, to find out who they are, to expand, to spread their wings and fly. When my partner spreads their wings and begins to fly, if they fly away from me, then so be it, right? I don't want to cut off their wings to make sure that it's not, my priority has shifted. It's what's most important to me is not that we stay together, right? And you can accomplish that by cutting off someone's wings. But there's a shift in priority that happens where it's like, no, you want to keep your own wings. You want your partner to have their wings. And if when you're both free to fly and to expand freely and you still stay together, that's a beautiful, enlightened relationship. And there's also nothing wrong with encouraging your partner to grow their wings, to spread their wings and fly. You do the same. You spread your wings and fly. You grow together in this relationship. And if you mutually discover that when you have wings and you're free to fly, you kind of fly apart, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's not a failure. In fact, you both helped each other grow tremendously in order to follow on your own true paths. That's beautiful. That relationship never dies. That's so, so beautiful. Have the courage to spread your wings and fly, Have the courage to allow your partner to spread their wings and fly. This doesn't mean suppress emotional responses as they come up. No, use them as opportunities to grow together, to practice radical honesty. Have the courage to find out if both of you are totally free. Can it work? Can it work? Will it work? Is the universe going to keep us together? Is this a relationship that's based in ego? Or is this a relationship that's based in the deeper purpose of the universe having brought us together? Okay, one more question. How do you make the difference between someone being manipulative / them asking these uncomfortable expectations versus me needing to change my ways? I've been in a toxic friendship, and your videos cause a door to open for me in so many ways. I'm so grateful, realizing how I've been getting dragged down in a lot of ways, not allowing myself to act freely. We've decided this is the end of our dance together, at least for now. I know I've messed up too during the time we've been close, so sometimes reflecting, I'm conflicted. I can't tell if I'm falling into manipulation or if I need to act differently. I recognize I need to gain awareness to see the difference. Okay, I understand the question greatly, and I've been in friendships where they're like calling out things that they think I should change about me, and I just get this icky feeling like, I don't really feel like I'm doing anything wrong. And I'll give you an example. So I'm the kind of person who I'm very spontaneous. I'm very go with the flow. This is how I feel the most alive. I can often be slow to respond to texts, forgetful to respond to texts. I can go long periods of time in between seeing my friends, right? And from my end, none of this indicates a lack of love whatsoever. All of this is just my way of being, where I feel in tune, connected, alive, and thriving. Spontaneous, go with the flow. I'm not really calculating, I should reach out to this person once a week to make sure they know that I love them, right? I'm not thinking this way. When you're worried about me not texting you, I'm literally like sitting and hugging a tree and crying because I'm feeling so connected to the tree, right? So then when friends have come to me and been like, low-key, like subtly trying to pressure me into responding more, into hanging out with them more, that can start to give me these red flags that someone is trying to control me for their own benefit. So that is something to be aware of, and I think that happens, right? People do have tendencies to manipulate and control others for their own benefits. Absolutely. It's okay to look out for that, but also be open to the possibility that you are making mistakes, that you are slipping into your ego, right? It's possible. In my romantic partnership right now, I slip into my ego a lot. It's inevitable. We're all going to slip into our ego sometimes and make mistakes. And it's good to be open to feedback, to be open to growing. But it really irks me when I'm just kind of out there vibing very peacefully, and I feel this like energy of possession and control imposed upon me, and it's like, there is a balance here. There is a balance, because it's like, especially coming from a former people pleaser, we have to be careful. We have to be like on red alert of people trying to control us and manipulate us, because we're so conditioned into giving into that, into giving everybody all of our energy whenever they want it, and into giving into manipulation. And especially there's this dangerous thing of like, when you're starting to feel like someone's manipulating you and you're starting to resist it, there's this thing that comes up with people pleasers where we feel like we're being a bad person. We do need to develop awareness of this and learn to stick up for ourselves. And generally, it's like, yeah, we do have the right to, if we're not stepping on someone's toes, we're okay, right? I love the dance floor analogy. If we're having a great time dancing on the dance floor and we're wiggling all around and interacting with all types of different people, and like you've got a friend in the corner who's like looking at you angry because you're not spending enough time with them, or you're not texting them or giving them enough attention, that becomes like, like, why do I have to limit my dance for them, right? I'm just radiating love outwards to everybody. I'm having a good time. I'm in my element. I'm in tune. I'm connected. I'm in harmony. It is wise to look out for that kind of controlling energy, but also be it like sometimes, and accept people's mistakes as well, right? Hold the vision of the truth for everybody. If someone's in their ego and they're unconsciously manipulating you, have the courage to bring that up, right? See if that relationship can sustain the truth in that way. This doesn't always have to apply to romantic relationships, right? Like if you notice your friend potentially manipulating you or controlling you or limiting your freedom, limiting your love, have the courage to be honest about what you're feeling. That's how you can. And then you could end up exploding their own inner growth, their own personal growth. Or maybe they won't get it and they're too deep and too unconsciously stuck in a pattern. A lot of people were conditioned into a very transactional view of love, where they feel like you need to do all these things in order to prove that you love me. We should stop tolerating that, because we need to help these people grow by showing them through our example that we can love everyone unconditionally, and there's no need to control anybody, and there's no need for love to be transactional. We can allow it to all be inherent and flow out spontaneously. And then I think I've said it 100 times, but also don't slip into ego arrogance. I feel like I could potentially be guilty about this sometimes, where it's like, oh, I'm on the spiritual path, I'm getting enlightened, like I don't slip into my ego, there's nothing I can do wrong, I'm always right. Be careful of that too. Be willing to be called out. Have the courage to call people out on their ego shit, and have the courage to be called out on your ego shit. That's how we facilitate mutual growth. And if you try to get into that truth contract where both people are trying to awaken and tell the truth and put the egos aside and acknowledge what the egos are doing, if you're trying to get into that truth contract but the relationship can't sustain it, that's okay too. And then it's maybe a more distant relationship, right? Nothing wrong with either way. Of course, it's very beautiful if you can get into that truth relationship with somebody. Really want to send love and appreciation to all of you for listening. I love doing this podcast. I love having you along. Reminders, one-on-one sessions, spiritual chats with yours truly are just $25. Great way to support me. Great way to get into some of the spiritual predicaments you're working with right now. Patreon, other ways to support, merchandise, all in the show notes or the description. Much love. Namaste. Hope the journey is beautiful and exquisite this week. It always is, whether or not your ego thinks it is or not. I'll see you next time.